Welcome, let's talk about serial killers. My name is Merryweather and I'm the founder of Crime Viral Online. Today I'll be doing what I do best, which is talking about serial killers. 2020 has been a difficult year for all of us, but I believe we should look at the positives in everything. And for me, finally seeing the Golden State Killer, Joseph DeAngelo, convicted following a manhunt that lasted more than 42 years was a relief. So I will never get tired of explaining exactly how he was caught. And I would like to share that with you today. This is how they finally caught the Golden State Killer, using familial DNA. Between 1976 and 1986, the Golden State Killer launched a reign of terror and committed at least 5 rapes, 12 murders and 120 residential burglaries throughout California. Then he disappeared without a trace. Criminal DNA databases produced no hits, sweeps of the crime scenes produced no fingerprints, and despite very generous rewards, nobody came forward with any helpful tips. Then former cold case investigator Paul Holes and genealogy expert Rae-Venter turned to familial DNA to help solve the case. Ancestry.com has profiles of more than 16 million users, and 23andMe has more than 10 million users. When you sign up to these websites, you receive a DNA testing kit to send off a saliva sample to the testing lab. Once your results arrive, you upload your genetic profile to GEDmatch, a free online database where anyone can share their genetic profile if they wish. It's a great way to discover where your relatives live around the world, or if you have a genetic predisposition to any diseases. At the lab, your DNA sample enters the process of genetic sequencing, which involves cutting the DNA into tiny fragments and scattering them over a genotyping chip to see what sticks. This will then identify the series of DNA letters in a sample, creating a genetic profile. Your genetic profile is then sent back to you. But if you've used Ancestry.com and your long-lost brother has used 23andMe, you won't be able to find each other. So you upload your genetic profile to GEDmatch, and this can help you add more branches to your family tree. This database, however, is also used by law enforcement agencies to help solve serious and violent crimes. If law enforcement has biological material belonging to a person of interest from a crime scene, either blood, hair or semen, they can search genetic profiles on GEDmatch to find a partial match, also known as familial DNA. Familial DNA testing can only be used once prosecution has proven that all other reasonable methods of investigation has produced no results. Or if this is an emergency situation, for example, the serial killer is likely to strike again very soon, or they believe the suspect is going to make a run for it. Your DNA is roughly 50% similar to each of your parents, 25% to your grandparents, first cousins share about 12.5% of their DNA, second cousins less than 4%, and third cousins less than 1%. Investigators created a fake profile using the Golden State Killer's DNA from a 1980 crime scene, and it produced a hit. They matched with a third cousin of the Golden State Killer. So they still don't know who the Golden State Killer is, but they do know who his third cousin is. Here's where it gets really good. Time for the elimination process. The Golden State Killer investigators had basic knowledge of the serial killer based on witness testimonies. For example, approximate height, age, weight, including police sketches of the suspect. They have enough evidence to suspect the serial killer is a white male, approximately 5 foot 10 inches tall, who lives or at least works in the California area. They can then start to eliminate other members of the family who don't fit this profile. These DNA databases then work as a roadmap directly to the serial killer. Holes said 5 investigators spent 4 months building the family trees, generation by generation, name by name. They put this together using census records, newspaper obituaries, gravesite locators, and police and commercial databases to find each relative. His team then painstakingly created about 25 family trees containing thousands of relatives, right from the killer's great-great-great-grandparents who lived in the early 1800s to the present day, the genetic profile of his third cousin. They then found on one branch of this family tree a 72-year-old retiree named Joseph DeAngelo, who was living quietly in the Sacramento suburbs. He matched the witness description. He was a white male, standing 5 foot 10 inches tall and weighing 165 pounds. They also found that this man was a former disgraced cop who had bought 2 guns during the time of the Golden State Killer's activity. So now they need to obtain a new DNA sample from DeAngelo without his knowledge, because the worst thing that could happen is he gets spooked and starts destroying a lot of crucial evidence. Many organised serial killers collect serial killer trophies. We have another video on this channel explaining all about that if you want to check it out. Joseph DeAngelo had a goldmine of overwhelming evidence against him belonging to the victims, and he also had ski masks which he used to break into the homes. This could have been a disaster if law enforcement spooked him and he started to destroy this evidence, so they had to be careful. With DeAngelo placed under surveillance, they now had to obtain a new DNA sample without him knowing. Police are legally allowed to collect discarded DNA without the suspect's knowledge. You and I shed DNA all over the place. We leave it on cups, straws, on surfaces. This discarded DNA can only be used in evidence if it's left in a public place. If you discard a hairbrush you use, place it in a trash can, and put this at the end of your street to be picked up, that actually counts as a public place. In the case of DeAngelo, they used a swab of his car door handle. On April 24, 2018, Joseph DeAngelo was finally arrested. Then in June 2020, in a makeshift courtroom set up at Sacramento State University to allow for social distancing during the coronavirus pandemic, 74-year-old Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. uttered one word in his low, raspy voice: guilty. So after 40 years of investigation, DeAngelo was finally caught because his third cousin spat in a tube and sent it off to a genealogy website. This was not the first time familial DNA was used to help solve a murder case. It was actually used before in the tale of the Grim Sleeper. For more than 20 years, the Grim Sleeper stalked women on the streets of South Central Los Angeles, killing at least 10 African American women between 1985 and 2007. As the victims walked home from parties late at night, the serial killer launched his vicious attacks, smashing their heads with rocks or wrapping his hands around their necks. Sometimes he threatened them with a gun before raping and killing the victim, and then leaving the body in an alleyway. He was nicknamed the Grim Sleeper because he was dormant for 14 years before resuming his killing spree. Members of the local community complained that police were not investigating the string of murders because the victims were poor and black, and many were drug users and prostitutes. Finally, in 2010, DNA evidence tied Lonnie Franklin to those killings, and he also became a suspect in multiple other murders, with the real victim count believed to be between 25 to 100 women. However, the DNA evidence that the investigators used and linked them to Franklin wasn't actually his DNA. It belonged to his son after a 2008 arrest for firearm and drug offenses in California. In California, anyone arrested for a felony must give a DNA sample even if they have not been charged with a crime. Police were able to narrow down the suspects, and eventually they zeroed in on Franklin. However, authorities did not have a DNA sample for Franklin, so they placed him under surveillance until they got one. The suspected serial killer had a meal in a pizza diner, and the leftovers, fork and napkin were collected as evidence for DNA testing by a detective posing as a busboy. On June 6, 2016, a Los Angeles County jury sentenced Franklin to death. Since the case of the Grim Sleeper, familial DNA has helped solve more than 28 cold cases and bring the murderers to justice. However, despite its clear benefits, familial DNA has caused a lot of controversy, as it has been previously argued that it invades privacy rights. The reason investigators used a fake profile on GEDmatch to try and find the Golden State Killer was because the CEO of the website didn't even know that law enforcement was using their service to help solve crimes. When DeAngelo was arrested, GEDmatch updated its terms of service to inform users that law enforcement was using the database and they couldn't stop them as it was perfectly legal for now. This won't be the last time we see familial DNA being used to solve cold cases or hearing about the controversy that surrounds it. So if you want to upload your genetic profile to GEDmatch, it's a great way to check out your ancestry. Also, if you guys have an uncle who you always thought was up to no good or a cousin you're not too fond of, you might be able to catch them out on something. Thanks for watching this video. We'll be back next week with even more. Feel free to comment below with your suggestions and don't forget to like and subscribe.